So hopefully you've watched part one of why my family and I have decided a long time ago to observe lunar Sabbaths. As I was thinking after I did part one about how it all began in 1999, my mind went back and said, all right, Matthew, you need to kind of go back and share about something that happened in 1998. So I was married in January of 1998. I had to think about it there for a second. January of 1998. And later that year, I had been reading the Bible and studying the Bible, and I came across a couple of passages. One was at the end of the prophet Isaiah, book of Isaiah, and the other one was in the book of Amos. And those two passages were about the new moon. And I went with my father-in-law on a trip up north to a Bible conference. And on that trip, we were driving, and back then, all we had was the little Franklin Bible computer. I'll never forget my father-in-law. He carried around that Franklin Bible computer with him, King James Version, everywhere he would go. That was before we had, the internet was real big. I mean, I guess we had dial-up, but didn't work real good. And so we had that Franklin Bible computer, and I told him, I said, I've been reading some verses about the new moon. And he said, well, can you share them with me? Now, at that time, we did not observe the new moon as a holy day. We observed the feast days, or my father-in-law had been observing the feast days. That would be my first year. My first Passover was in 1998, so that would be my first year of observing the annual feast days. But he did not observe the new moon as a holy day. He just used the new moon, as he understood it, to count for his annual feast days. So I told him, I said, I've been reading some text about the new moon, and it looks like that it's a holy day. It's a day of worship. It's a day of holy convocation. It's not a normal work day. There's something special about it. And he said, well, show me the verses. And so the first one I went to was Isaiah 66, verses 22 through 23, where we'd always use this verse to teach people about the Sabbath day. And we'd say, well, as the new heavens and the new earth remain before me, so will your seed and your name will remain, and it'll come to pass that from one new moon to another and from one Sabbath to another all flesh will come and worship before me, saith Yahweh. So this is something that's written in the prophets, not necessarily the Torah, but the prophets or the Nevi'im, which are considered to be the law. But it's written in the prophets, but it's thus saith Yahweh. And I told him, I said, if we're going to use this verse to teach Sabbath worship on the Sabbath, to be consistent, we would have to use it to teach that we should worship on the new moon. And he shook his head. He said, show me the next verse. I went to Amos 8, where there were some greedy traders in the land, and they were saying, when will the new moon be gone, that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath that we may set forth wheat, and falsify the balances by deceit. So there was greedy traders in the land, and they were wanting to have unjust weights and measures in their dealings with people. But they couldn't, because the Israelites wouldn't buy and sell on the Sabbath and the new moon. So they say, when will the new moon be gone? So we can, set forth wheat, and so we can sell grain. And when will the Sabbath be gone? And so the new moon's right there with the Sabbath. And my father-in-law shook his head, and he was like, okay, that makes sense. I see what you're saying. And so then I think we switched positions in the car, and I started driving, and he took that little Franklin Bible computer and he punched in new moon. And we came across passages like Numbers 10 in the Torah, where it talks about Numbers 10 verse 10, in the beginnings of your months, or the beginnings of your moons, because that word month in Hebrew is Hodesh, and it's used interchangeably often with the word Yerach in Hebrew, which is a reference to the moon, the lunar orb in the sky at nighttime. And so in the beginning of your moons, you're to blow with 2 silver trumpets. And if you read Numbers 10, whenever the sons of Aaron would blow with 2 silver trumpets, it was to call the assembly, to call the congregation. We read that. We read 2 Kings 4:23, where the lady had a child that got hurt in the field, and she told her husband, I'm going to take this child to the man of Elohim. And he said, why do you want to go to the Met of Elohim? It's neither the new moon or the Sabbath. There again, new moon and Sabbath are right there close to each other. And we read Ezekiel 46, verse 1, where it talks about how that the gate of the inner court that looketh toward the east will be shut during the 6 working days, but it'll be opened on the Sabbath and in the day of the new moon. There, the new moon is mentioned in the same context as the Sabbath, and it's separate and distinct from the 6 working days. So by the time we got to the Bible meeting, my father-in-law made the decision, and myself, that we're going to start observing the new moons as a holy day. That it's not one of the regular 6 working days. It's separate and distinct. Now, mind you, this was a good year before we started to observe lunar Sabbaths. So what we would do is we would keep Sabbath from Friday evening to Saturday evening, and then we would keep the annual festivals, but anytime a new moon would roll around, so we would observe the new moon as a holy day. So let's say that we kept Sabbath on Saturday and then the new moon happened on Sunday. We would take 2 days off of work. Well, let's say the Sabbath happened on Saturday and the new moon happened on a Wednesday. We would take Saturday and Wednesday off of work. And so we were already accustomed to not working on the new moon based upon the scriptures and the law and the prophets and the thus saith Yahweh, like in Isaiah and in Ezekiel 46, you have these thus saith Yahweh texts about the new moon. And so I believe that when fall of 1999 came around and we were presented with the idea that the Sabbath was regulated by the lunar cycle, I believe that us already having an understanding of the holiness of the new moon day helped lead and guide us into the Sabbath being regulated by the moon. If you want to hear more, you're going to have to wait for part 3. Hope you're having a great day. Shalom.